We're not talking about Atlantis or some mythical city. We're talking about a real-life historical enigma, the Indus Valley Civilization. For nearly 2,000 years, this incredible society thrived, building some of the world's first planned cities, like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. They had sophisticated drainage systems, standardized weights and measures, and a mysterious script we still can't decipher. And then, around 1900 BC, it all started to crumble. What happened? Why did millions of people abandon these magnificent cities? That's the mystery we're diving into today. Let's set the scene. Imagine a vast area, larger than ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia, stretching across modern-day Pakistan and northwest India. This was the heartland of the Indus people, also known as the Harappans. Their cities were masterpieces of urban planning. Streets were laid out in a perfect grid, houses were built with uniform baked bricks, and almost every home had its own private bathroom and connection to a city-wide sanitation network. This was thousands of years before the Romans built their famous aqueducts. Have you ever heard of a massive, advanced civilization that just vanished? They were master traders with their distinctive seals found as far away as Mesopotamia. They were farmers, artists, and engineers. They had a complex social structure, but strangely, we've found no evidence of grand palaces, royal tombs, or monuments to kings and queens. It seems they were a remarkably egalitarian society, focused on order and practicality. For centuries, this was a world of stability and prosperity, but then the silence began. The first major theory, and one of the oldest, points a finger at invaders, specifically a group of nomadic people called the Aryans. This idea, known as the Aryan invasion theory, was first proposed by archaeologist Mortimer Wheeler in the mid-20th century. He discovered several unburied skeletons at Mohenjo-Daro and interpreted them as victims of a violent conquest. He connected this with the Rig Veda, an ancient collection of Sanskrit hymns which describes battles and the destruction of forts. The image was dramatic, horse-drawn chariots storming the city walls, overwhelming the peaceful Indus people. It was a compelling story that dominated textbooks for decades. However, as archaeologists continued their work, this dramatic narrative started to fall apart. First, the number of skeletons found was very small, not nearly enough to suggest a full-scale massacre of a large city. Further examination showed that many of the so-called massacre victims weren't killed in a single violent event. Their deaths were spread out over a long period, and many showed signs of diseases like anemia, not battle wounds. Plus, the timeline didn't quite match up. The decline of the Indus cities began long before the proposed arrival of the Aryans. So, while there might have been migrations and some localized conflicts, the idea of a single, swift invasion wiping out an entire civilization is now largely dismissed by most historians. The real answer had to be more complex. So, if it wasn't a great war, what was it? The next big clue came from the ground itself and the sky. Scientists began studying the ancient climate of the region, and they discovered something dramatic. The Indus Valley Civilization flourished during a period of stable, predictable monsoons. These yearly rains were the lifeblood of their agriculture, feeding the rivers and watering the vast fields of wheat and barley that supported their large urban populations. But around 2000 BC, the climate started to change. The monsoons became weaker and much more erratic. Imagine you're a farmer in the Indus Valley. For generations, your family has known exactly when the rains will come. You plant your crops, the rivers swell, your fields are irrigated, and you get a bountiful harvest. Now, suddenly, the rains don't come. Or they come at the wrong time, or they're too weak. Your crops fail year after year. The mighty Gagar-Hakra River, which once flowed through the heartland of the civilization and supported hundreds of settlements, began to dry up. This wasn't a sudden catastrophe, but a slow, grinding environmental crisis that lasted for centuries. This climate change theory has gained a lot of traction because it explains so much. It explains why the decline was so gradual. It wasn't a single event, but a slow squeeze. The agricultural surplus that supported the big cities, the artisans, the traders, and the administrators simply disappeared. Without enough food, the large urban centers could no longer sustain their populations. People started to leave, not because of an enemy at the gates, but because there was no food in the granaries. They were forced to abandon their magnificent brick cities and search for a new way of life. The evidence for this is compelling. Studies of lake bed sediments, river deposits, and even the chemical composition of snail shells from the period all point to a prolonged period of severe drought. The very foundation of the Indus society, predictable water and abundant food, was crumbling beneath their feet. But was climate change the only factor? Some researchers believe it was part of a bigger, interconnected puzzle. Another piece of this puzzle might lie deep within the Earth's crust. The Indus region is tectonically active. Some geologists have proposed that major earthquakes could have played a significant role. A powerful earthquake could have dramatically altered the course of rivers. It could have lifted the riverbeds, causing catastrophic floods that would have destroyed cities and agricultural land. Or it could have rerouted rivers entirely, leaving once fertile areas high and dry. There is geological evidence of such tectonic shifts in the region. For instance, the course of the Indus River itself has changed over the millennia. A major earthquake could have been the final blow to a society already weakened by drought, or it could have triggered the very river changes that amplified the effects of the weak monsoons. So, we have a society under immense stress. The climate is changing, the rains are failing, and the rivers that were their lifeline are either drying up or flooding unpredictably due to geological shifts. What happens to a society under this kind of pressure? It begins to break down. The complex trade networks that brought in raw materials from afar would have collapsed. Without the surplus food and a stable environment, the centralized authority, whatever form it took, would have lost its ability to manage the cities. The meticulously planned urban centers would have become harder to maintain. We see evidence of this in the later stages of cities like Mohenjo-Daro. The construction becomes shoddier. Large public buildings are subdivided into smaller, cruder dwellings, and the sophisticated drainage systems fall into disrepair. It's a picture of urban decay, a slow-motion collapse driven by resource scarcity. What this paints is a picture not of a sudden disappearance, but of a transformation. The Indus Valley civilization didn't just vanish into thin air. The people didn't die out. Instead, they adapted. They moved. The centralized, urban phase of their culture ended. People abandoned the large cities and dispersed into smaller, more rural, and more self-sufficient villages. They migrated eastward towards the more humid Gangetic Plain, where the rainfall was more reliable. The grand, unified culture fractured into various regional, post-Harappan cultures. The defining features of the Indus civilization, the large cities, the writing system, the standardized weights disappeared, but the people themselves survived, carrying their genetic and cultural legacy with them. In a way, the story of the Indus Valley's disappearance is a story of resilience. Faced with an environmental crisis that they couldn't control, they made the difficult choice to abandon their old way of life to survive. They deurbanized, decentralized, and found new homes. This is why we see elements of Harappan culture, like certain pottery styles and agricultural practices, living on in the successor cultures that emerged. The great civilization collapsed, but the people endured. So, the mystery of the Indus Valley civilization doesn't have a single, simple answer. It wasn't just invaders, or just climate change, or just earthquakes. It was most likely a fatal combination of all these factors, a perfect storm. A changing climate weakened them, geological events may have delivered critical blows, and the resulting resource scarcity led to the breakdown of their social and economic systems. The great cities were abandoned, and their writing was forgotten, leaving us with one of history's most fascinating and enduring mysteries. The story of their decline serves as a powerful, ancient warning about how fragile even the most advanced civilizations can be in the face of a changing environment. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. What do you think is the most likely reason for their decline? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy unraveling the great mysteries of history, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more adventures into the past. We'll see you in the next one.